On the porch lies an unconscious girl, her tiny German Shepherd puppy nestled against her chest, desperately seeking the last vestiges of warmth. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, drowning out the dog's weak whimpering. Inside the house, a Navy SEAL had just woken up, and as he opened the door, a battle began in his mind. A battle between the cold and survival. What happened next would change their fate forever. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe for more. The wind roared through the Wyoming mountains, scattering snow like shattered glass beneath the fading moonlight. A cabin stood alone among the trees, half buried under white drifts, its chimney releasing thin trails of smoke that vanished into the storm. Inside, warmth flickered uncertainly against the darkness, a fragile refuge in a world of cold and silence. By the hearth sat Ethan Cole, his tall frame slightly slouched in a worn armchair, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside him. He was 39, his build still soldier-strong, but his movements deliberate, slowed by an old wound that never healed right. His short brown hair, peppered with gray, clung damply to his temples. His beard was uneven, his eyes pale blue and distant, eyes that had seen too much. Years in the Navy SEALs had made him both sharp and hollow, a man forged for battle, yet left defenseless against memory. Tonight, the ghosts came early. The wind outside reminded him of the desert winds of Afghanistan, the ones that always carried Titan's last bark, echoing in the smoke. A sudden sound snapped him from his trance, a faint knock, barely audible above the storm. He frowned, listening. The nearest road was miles away. Nobody came here. He told himself it was just the wind, but the sound came again, 3 deliberate knocks, slow, human. Training overrode fear. He reached for the flashlight on the table and rose, his limp heavy on the wooden floor. The door shuddered under the pressure of the gale. When he pulled it open, a rush of snow exploded inward, biting his skin like needles. Through the blinding white, his light caught a shape. Something slumped at the bottom of the steps. He forced himself forward, boots sinking into the snow until the beam found her. A young woman lying half-buried, one arm outstretched, clutching a rope that led to a small, trembling bundle beside her. The storm howled, but Ethan could hear the faintest whimper coming from the tiny creature. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the woman's face. Her skin was paper pale, lashes frosted, lips blue and cracked. Her hair, long dark chestnut tangled with ice, clung to her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 27, a stranger, delicate yet weathered, the kind of person who had fought too hard for too long. Beside her, a German Shepherd puppy, no older than 10 weeks, whimpered weakly, its fur crusted with frost, amber eyes barely open. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He touched her neck, a pulse, faint, but there. He lifted her carefully, pressing her limp body against his chest. The puppy stumbled after him, sinking in the snow. Without hesitation, he scooped the small creature into his coat and trudged back toward the cabin, the storm swallowing his footprints. The door slammed shut behind them. Inside, the cabin filled with the sound of his hurried breath and the low moan of wind outside. Ethan laid the woman on the couch near the fire, working with the precision of habit, remove wet layers, insulate, rewarm gradually. He wrapped her in thick blankets, rubbed her hands and wrists with a towel, then slid a heating pad beneath her ribs. Her body trembled faintly, a fragile sign of life returning. The puppy sat near the hearth, shivering violently. Its fur was black and gold, tiny paws raw from ice. Ethan poured water into a tin bowl, tore a piece of jerky in half, and set it down. "You're tougher than you look, kid," he murmured. The pup sniffed, then ate greedily, tail tapping weakly against the rug. Ethan turned back to the girl. Her chest rose unevenly, breath ragged but steady. He rubbed her arms gently, willing warmth back into her. When her lips parted, he leaned closer. "Please," she whispered faintly, "don't let him die." Her voice was broken yet full of fierce conviction. "He's safe. Ethan said softly. "You both are." Her eyes flickered open, brown, deep, and lost. She tried to speak, but words tangled on her tongue. "The road, it vanished," she gasped. "I tried to find help. I couldn't leave him." Her gaze shifted toward the puppy, who whimpered softly in reply. Then her strength gave out, and her head fell against the couch. Ethan stared at her, at the raw mercy in that act, risking her life for a creature she could barely carry. He saw himself years ago, crouched in the desert, Titan bleeding out beside him, his own hands trembling as he whispered, "Stay with me." He had lost that battle, but maybe tonight he could win this one. Hours passed. Ethan fed the fire, checked her pulse, and tended the puppy. The storm outside grew wilder, but inside, the world had narrowed to the quiet rhythm of breathing. One human, one dog, one soldier, holding vigil. He studied her face under the firelight. Freckles faint on pale skin, a small scar along her chin, signs of a life that hadn't been easy. Yet, even unconscious, she looked like someone who refused to give up. By dawn, the storm began to break. Faint sunlight filtered through the frosted window, painting gold across the cabin walls. Ethan dozed in his chair, the rifle leaning nearby, out of habit. When a soft sound reached him, a breath, a stir, his eyes snapped open. The woman blinked groggily, confusion shadowing her face before recognition returned. "You saved me," she said weakly. He shook his head. "You got yourself here. I just opened the door." She turned her gaze toward the puppy curled near the hearth. "I couldn't leave him," she whispered. "Everyone else drove past. I thought if I kept walking, I'd find someone who cared." Ethan studied her. "You nearly froze to death over a dog." She smiled faintly, lips trembling. "It was worth it." He found no argument. He poured her a mug of hot water with honey and handed it to her, his calloused fingers brushing hers for an instant. "Drink slow," he said. She took a sip, her eyes meeting his. "I'm Maya." "Ethan," he replied quietly. He hadn't said his name aloud to a stranger in years. Outside, the snow eased into gentle flakes, falling soft as ash. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her cradle the mug, watching the puppy nudge at her hand as if to make sure she was real. Something fragile stirred inside him, not quite hope, but close enough to hurt. He whispered to the silence, "Guess the storm brought me more than ghosts tonight." Maya smiled through the fading haze of exhaustion. "Sometimes storms bring people home," she said, then drifted into sleep again. Ethan sat there long after, the fire crackling low, the puppy asleep against her leg. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a bunker. It felt like a heartbeat, small, unsteady, but alive. He turned his eyes to the window, where dawn brushed the horizon in pale gold. The world was still cold, still harsh, but for now, it wasn't empty. He exhaled slowly, the words barely leaving his lips. "Welcome home." Outside, the wind calmed, leaving only the quiet whisper of snow settling over the earth, the kind of silence that sounds like mercy. Morning came slow and pale over the Wyoming wilderness, the light seeping through frost-glazed windows like a hesitant promise. 3 days had passed since the storm, but the cabin still carried the quiet tremor of it. Snow piled high against the walls, icicles heavy on the eaves, and inside, the low hum of fire and breath. Ethan Cole moved through the small space with the steady precision of a man who preferred tasks to thoughts. He had rebuilt a rhythm around silence, stoking the fire, boiling water, checking the pulse of the woman who had appeared like a ghost at his door. Maya Brooks was stronger now. Her color had returned, faint rose brushing her cheeks, but weakness still clung to her like a shadow. She sat wrapped in Ethan's thick wool blanket, hair tangled, eyes heavy but clear. She was the kind of woman who looked fragile until she spoke, and then her voice carried quiet defiance. The faint scar along her wrist caught the firelight whenever she lifted her hand. Ethan noticed it but said nothing. He had seen enough scars to know which ones weren't meant for words. Shadow, the small German shepherd pup, had taken over the rug by the fire. His fur, once dull and stiff, now gleamed soft black and tan under the light. He was perhaps 11 weeks old now, his ears still uneven, one standing, the other flopped comically to the side. Yet even in playfulness there was the alert poise of the breed, curiosity and courage wrapped in small bones. Every so often he would lift his head and watch Ethan, as if studying the man's every move. "You haven't asked why I was out there," Maya said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but steady. Ethan didn't look up from the kettle. Didn't seem polite to interrogate a half-frozen stranger. A faint smile touched her lips. "My car died somewhere past the valley road. I was trying to get Shadow to the vet in town. He'd been abandoned, sick. I thought I could make it before dark." She paused, tracing the rim of her mug. "Guess I thought wrong." He turned toward her, leaning his weight slightly on the table. "You walked through that blizzard for a dog?" "I've done worse for less," she said simply. Her eyes flicked toward the fire, reflecting orange light. "Sometimes saving something small makes the world hurt less." The words hit deeper than she could have known. Ethan didn't reply. He stared into the steam rising from his cup, the way he used to watch smoke rise from burned-out vehicles overseas, searching for patterns that weren't there. For a moment he saw Titan again, the loyal shadow that had followed him through chaos and fire. The dog's final moments replayed like an old film reel behind his eyes. He had sworn off saving anything after that. The guilt was enough to kill belief itself. Outside, a new snow began to fall, light but constant, as if the world couldn't quite stop grieving. The cabin creaked softly under its weight. Ethan adjusted the lantern wick, more for distraction than light. "You should stay a few more days," he said at last. "Roads are still buried." "I'll repay you," Maya murmured. "I can help around the cabin." Ethan almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. "There's nothing here that needs fixing." She looked around, at the dusty shelves, the half-broken chair, the untouched second bed in the corner, and gave a faint, knowing smile. Maybe not things. The quiet stretched again, but this time it wasn't heavy. Outside, the sky began to dim toward late afternoon, and the fire cast long gold shapes across the floor. Shadow yawned, padding toward Maya's feet, curling there with a sigh. Ethan watched, feeling the kind of warmth that frightened him, the one that hinted at wanting something again. From down the slope, a faint figure appeared between the trees, a woman bundled in thick gray wool, her breath clouding in the cold. Clara Jennings, Ethan's nearest neighbor, was a relic of endurance herself, 65, wiry, with silver hair usually pinned into a messy knot beneath her knit cap. Her face, lined but bright, carried the unshakable gentleness of someone who had seen pain and refused to grow bitter from it. She had been a field nurse during the Gulf War, and though her back bent now, her spirit didn't. She trudged through snow with a basket slung over her arm and the brisk authority of someone immune to the cold. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. "You shouldn't be walking out here, Clara." "Oh, nonsense," she said, brushing snow off her coat. "I've done worse things for nosier reasons." She sniffed the air, her sharp gray eyes landing on Maya inside. "Ah, so this is why smoke's been dancing from your chimney all week." "This is Maya," Ethan said awkwardly. "She got caught in the storm, and that's Shadow." Clara's expression softened at once. "Lord have mercy, you poor thing," she said, stepping closer to Maya. "You look like you wrestled winter itself." She set down the basket, the scent of soup and herbs rising instantly, and pressed the back of her wrinkled hand to Maya's forehead. "Still cold, but you'll live. I brought something for strength." Maya smiled weakly. "Thank you." Ethan muttered. "You didn't have to come." Clara gave him a look that could disarm generals. "I've been your neighbor for 2 years, Ethan Cole, and I've seen you more often in my prayers than in person. If the good Lord decided to send you company, I'm not about to argue with him." He had no reply. She ladled soup into bowls, her movements practiced and precise. The smell filled the room. Chicken, rosemary, something grounding. When she caught Ethan's lingering glance, she said softly, "Sometimes God doesn't knock with thunder, dear. Sometimes he knocks with a weak hand that needs help opening the door." Maya's eyes glistened, and even Ethan found no words. The air grew warmer. Shadow wagged his tail and rested his chin on Maya's knee. As night fell, Clara bundled herself again, ready to return home. "Keep her near the fire," she told Ethan, "and keep that heart of yours from freezing again." Her smile was brief but kind before she disappeared into the snow. When the cabin door shut, silence reclaimed the room. Ethan stared into the flames, his reflection flickering between light and shadow. Maya was watching him quietly. "She cares about you," she said. "She cares about everyone," he replied. "That's her curse." "Maybe it's a gift," Maya said, curling the blanket closer. "People like that keep the rest of us from falling apart." Later that night, when Maya slept and Shadow's small snores filled the air, Ethan stepped outside. The moon was half veiled by drifting clouds. The forest glittered under frost. He stood there, hands in pockets, listening to the world breathe again after days of silence. Somewhere far down the mountain, faint light shimmered from the town. Civilization he no longer felt part of. At that very hour, in that very town, another man sat awake. Dr. Ben Carter. Once a military surgeon, now the weary doctor of a small rural clinic, Ben was in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair dark as midnight and eyes that betrayed exhaustion more than age. His beard was neatly trimmed, but the lines around his mouth told of too many sleepless nights. He had once served beside Ethan, patching soldiers together in chaos. It was Ben who pulled shrapnel from Ethan's leg and watched Titan die in his arms. That memory never left him. When news reached him that the blizzard had swallowed most of the northern valley, something inside stirred, an instinct, or guilt, or both. He checked the map, tracing the remote ridge where Ethan had vanished years ago. "Maybe it's time," he muttered to himself, closing his medical bag. Ethan lingered on the porch until his breath came out in mist. Inside, through the frosted glass, he could see Maya sleeping, Shadow pressed close against her. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't look like a tomb. It looked like a place where someone might begin again. He didn't yet believe in miracles, but tonight he thought he might try. The sky began to snow again, soft and soundless, blanketing the tracks of the past. And in the heart of the storm's aftermath, a man who had stopped believing took his first breath of something close to faith. Snow still covered the mountains like an unbroken ocean of white, but the storm's fury had passed, leaving only silence, deep, vast, and fragile. Inside the cabin, warmth had begun to live again. The fire glowed steady now, its flames dancing in rhythm with quiet voices and softer breathing. The days had stretched into a routine of survival and something gentler, something close to peace. Ethan Cole was at the workbench near the window, sleeves rolled up, turning the dial of a battered shortwave radio. His fingers were steady, deliberate, the hands of a man who'd once disarmed bombs and set broken bones with equal precision. Across the room, Maya Brooks sat by the fire, mending a torn jacket with thread and needle she'd found in his old field kit. Her face, though still pale from recovery, had regained warmth. Faint color touched her cheeks whenever she smiled. Her dark chestnut hair, now brushed and tied loosely behind her head, framed her face in soft strands that caught the light. There was resilience in her, not the loud kind born of pride, but the quiet endurance that had already survived too much. Shadow darted between them, bigger now, stronger in movement, the tan black fur glistening as he bounded over the rug. His paws were still clumsy, but his spirit wasn't. He barked at the crackling firewood as if daring it to challenge him. Ethan glanced at the pup with the faintest hint of a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You've spoiled him," he said. "I've given him love," Maya replied, not looking up from her stitching. "There's a difference." "Love gets things killed," Ethan muttered without thinking. The words came sharp, too sharp, and the silence afterward hung heavy. Maya looked up. "You don't really believe that?" He turned a knob on the radio, pretending to focus. The static hissed, crackled, then fell back to silence. "I've seen it happen," he said quietly. Maya's voice softened. "You've seen loss, not love. They're not the same." Ethan didn't answer. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire and the soft clink of metal tools. Then he exhaled and said, almost to himself, "His name was Titan." Maya looked up, waiting. "He was my partner," Ethan continued, his voice steady but his eyes somewhere far away. "A canine, trained for search and breach. Smartest damn dog I ever knew. Saved more men than I did. We were in Helmand province. Roadside mission gone wrong. I told him to stay back, but he didn't." He stopped, jaw tightening. "When it blew, I thought I died with him. Maybe I did, in a way." Maya put down the needle slowly and crossed the room, her bare feet light against the wooden floor. She stopped beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of pine soap in her hair. "You did what you could," she said softly. "And maybe he did too. Dogs don't follow orders when it comes to saving us. They just love." Ethan turned slightly away, his hand gripping the edge of the table. The firelight caught the scar on his temple, the faint tremor in his jaw. He didn't speak. Then, without warning, his shoulders shifted, a small, almost imperceptible tremor, and a single tear traced down the side of his face before he brushed it away roughly with the back of his hand. Maya's hand rested gently on his shoulder, her touch warm, steady. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to hold everything forever." He turned then, just slightly, meeting her eyes. Something cracked open in that look, the smallest thaw after years of frost. Neither spoke again for a while. Outside, the forest was still, the kind of stillness that comes only after surviving something violent. But miles away, an engine roared faintly across the valley. Dr. Ben Carter's old truck, its headlights slicing through curtains of snow. Ben was a man who carried guilt the way others carried faith. He had been a soldier of healing once, patching broken men under mortar fire, watching too many die, despite steady hands. Now he drove through Wyoming's frozen back roads, the radio crackling faint signals as he searched for an old friend who had once vanished into silence. Inside the truck, his breath fogged the windshield. The rear-view mirror reflected his sharp features. Strong jaw, dark hair streaked with silver, eyes the color of smoke. He had the look of a man who'd spent years fighting sleep. Every bump in the icy road jolted his memories loose. Ethan's limp body dragged from rubble, the dog's lifeless form beside him. "You're not going to fade out like the rest of them," Ben muttered under his breath, tightening his grip on the wheel. Back at the cabin, night had settled again. Maya stirred soup on the stove while Ethan adjusted the radio antenna. A weak burst of static flickered through the air, then, faintly, a human voice. "Emergency channel, Route 7. Repeat." Ethan froze, twisting the dial. "Say that again." The signal flickered, fractured by the wind. Maya came closer, eyes wide. "It's from the town," Ethan said. "Probably snow damage to the main line." She nodded, worry creasing her brow. "Can they hear us?" He keyed the transmitter. "This is Coal Ridge Cabin, north of Route 7. 2 occupants. Requesting weather status." Static. Then a faint female voice. "Storm front moving again. Possible collapse zones. Stay indoors." The signal died completely. Ethan sighed, leaning back. We're cut off again. Maya frowned. So, we wait. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded. We wait. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. Shadow fell asleep between them, his small body rising and falling in sync with the crackling fire. The room smelled of pine wood and soup, human and animal warmth tangled together in the air. Maya spoke, suddenly her tone low. You ever think about leaving here? Going back? Ethan shook his head. Back to what? The world doesn't need another broken soldier. Maybe it needs one who's still willing to fix something, she said. He met her gaze, half smiling despite himself. You always talk like someone who believes in miracles. I don't, she said quietly, but I believe in people who can still try. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, Ben's truck rattled over ice, his headlights flickering. He'd caught a faint radio signal minutes ago. Not words, but a voice. A woman's voice, calling faintly through static. He leaned closer to the receiver. Hold on, he whispered. I'm coming. Back at the cabin, the fire began to dim. Ethan tossed another log into the hearth, sparks flaring bright. He sat back beside Maya, watching the orange glow shift across her face. For the first time since she had arrived, they weren't strangers, not soldier and survivor, not rescuer and rescued, just two weary hearts thawing side by side. Outside, the snow fell soft again, gentle and unthreatening this time. Ethan's voice broke the silence, quiet, almost prayerful. Maybe miracles don't come when we look for them, he said. Maybe they come when we finally stop. Maya smiled faintly, eyes glimmering in the half-light. Or maybe they come when we start believing in people again. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, his lips curving into something that almost resembled peace. The storm beyond the cabin faded into whispering wind, and for the first time in years, the man who had stopped believing began to feel the warmth of life return, not through faith, but through the fragile courage of simply caring again. The wind began its low moan long before the snow came, a sound like the mountain breathing in warning. The air grew heavy, tense, and the world beyond the frosted windows dimmed into a dull gray. Ethan Cole stood at the cabin's doorway, his eyes on the horizon where clouds stacked like bruises across the sky. He knew that sound, the sound before everything goes wrong. In his life, storms had many faces, sand, fire, and blood. This one just wore snow. Maya Brooks set down a kettle on the table, watching him from across the room. Her dark hair was tied back this time, revealing the strong line of her jaw and the quiet determination in her eyes. She had shed the fragile look of the girl he found in the snow. Now she carried herself with a calm focus of someone who had already survived the worst. "It's coming again, isn't it?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Winds shifting north. The ridge won't hold the drifts this time." He grabbed his gloves and moved toward the window, tightening the shutters one by one. His limp was worse that day, the old injury burning as the cold pressed in. Shadow barked near the door, ears perked, tail low, a warning. The young German shepherd had grown bolder, his paws steadier, his voice sharper. He paced near the threshold, nose twitching, sensing what his humans didn't yet. Ethan crouched, ruffling the pup's fur. "You remember the last one, huh? You've got instincts, kid." The faintest smile passed his face, quickly gone as thunder cracked far in the distance, a dry, brittle sound that didn't belong to winter. Inside the cabin, Maya gathered what supplies she could find: blankets, a flashlight, Ethan's med kit. She moved with quiet efficiency, the way people do when fear is familiar. "You've been through storms like this before," she said. "You sound calm." "I've been through worse," he replied, bracing a beam against the shaking door. "That doesn't mean I'm not scared." The first gust hit before they could say more. It struck the cabin like a fist, rattling the windows and sending flakes through the cracks. The sound of the forest outside changed, branches snapping, snow sliding off in great sheets, the mountain coming alive. Maya grabbed the radio from the shelf and checked its frequency. The signal was weak but alive. "Route 7 emergency band," she muttered. "Maybe Ben's hearing us." "Or maybe no one is," Ethan said, forcing the door shut again as wind clawed at the frame. The second blow came harder. A deep, cracking roar split through the storm as something massive broke outside. Shadow barked furiously, tail tucked, eyes wide. Ethan turned just as the cabin shook with the sound of impact, a huge branch or tree slamming into the roof. The ceiling shuddered, boards groaning. Then came the sharp crack of splintering wood. A beam fell, striking Ethan's leg before he could move clear. "Ethan!" Maya's scream cut through the howl of wind. She rushed to him, the world spinning in noise and chaos. The beam had grazed his thigh but left a deep gash down the side, blood already darkening the denim. He tried to push himself up but collapsed with a grunt. "I'm fine," he said, voice ragged. "Get away from the wall!" But Maya ignored him. She grabbed the torn fabric near his leg and pressed her scarf to the wound, blood soaked through fast. "You're not fine," she said through clenched teeth. "You're bleeding bad." He tried to argue, but the pain made his words come out as a growl. "It's just a cut." "Stop talking," she snapped, tying the scarf tight and wrapping it with a strip of cloth from the blanket. Her hands moved quickly, guided by instinct rather than training. "You saved me once. My turn." The roof creaked again. Snow poured in through the broken beams, swirling through the light of the fire. The temperature dropped fast. Maya looked at the radio on the table. It flickered faintly with static. She crawled toward it, adjusting the dial with trembling fingers. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Coal Ridge Cabin," she said. "Injury, structural damage. We need assistance." Only static answered. She turned to Ethan. "The flare, where is it?" "Box near the stove," he said, breath short. "Maya, don't—" But she was already moving. She found the small red cylinder, fumbling with her gloves. Shadow pressed against her leg, whining, sensing her intent. "Stay," she whispered to him, though her voice shook. "Guard him." She pulled on her coat and boots, wrapping her scarf twice around her face before opening the door. The storm struck her like a wave, blinding, screaming, alive. Snow came sideways, slicing the air. Maya pushed forward step by step, her hand gripping the flare gun. Every breath felt like glass in her lungs. The cabin light disappeared behind her. She reached a clearing where the ridge dropped toward the valley, the only open space where a signal might be seen. Her hands shook as she raised the flare. "Please," she whispered to no one and fired. The red light tore through the blizzard, arching high before vanishing into the white. She fired a second, then stumbled to her knees, snow already bearing her boots. Miles away, the flare's faint glow caught the attention of a truck, grinding its way up the frozen slope. Dr. Ben Carter leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. His face, usually calm, hardened with urgency. "Clara, did you see that?" Beside him sat Clara Jennings, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, her hair tucked under a fur hat. Her lined face was pale but steady, her gray eyes sharp as steel. "I see it," she said, "and it's close." Ben pressed harder on the gas, the truck lurching as tires fought the ice. Clara gripped the door handle, her medical bag at her feet. "You sure this is wise?" she asked. "No," Ben said, "but it's necessary." They drove until the road vanished beneath drifts, then abandoned the truck and continued on foot. The wind screamed around them, snow erasing their tracks as soon as they were made. The flashlight beams cut through only a few feet ahead. "Ethan!" Ben shouted into the storm. "Ethan, can you hear me?" Nothing, only wind. Then, faintly, a bark, sharp, desperate, cutting through the white noise. "Shadow," Clara said. "Follow the sound." They stumbled forward, hearts pounding, until a dim glow appeared through the snow, the shattered outline of the cabin. The roof sagged, smoke curling weakly from the chimney. Inside, Maya crouched beside Ethan, shielding him with her own body as the wind forced snow through the broken beams. Her face was pale, lips blue, but her eyes burned with fierce resolve. When Ben and Clara burst through the door, she barely looked up. "He's bleeding," she said hoarsely. "Roof's coming down." Ben knelt beside Ethan immediately, his gloved hands already checking the pulse, assessing the wound. "You're lucky, old friend," he muttered. "Missed the artery by an inch." He tore open his kit and went to work, cleaning and dressing the gash. Clara placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You did good, sweetheart. He's going to be okay." Maya sagged then, the adrenaline fading. She looked down at Ethan, whose breathing was shallow but steady. His eyes opened briefly, meeting Ben's. "Didn't think you'd still come when called," he rasped. Ben smiled faintly. "Some debts don't expire." The wind outside began to soften. The storm was dying. Clara adjusted the blanket over Ethan and looked toward the fire. "He's alive," Ben said finally, exhaling. Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then that's enough to start over." In the silence that followed, Shadow crept closer, resting his head against Ethan's arm. The fire flickered weakly, but the warmth was returning. Outside, the mountain exhaled one last gust, then fell still. Morning came softly after the storm, spilling gold over the snow like forgiveness. The world outside the rescue outpost was quiet, save for the slow drip of melting ice from the eaves and the faint, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor inside. Ethan Cole woke to warmth for the first time in weeks, a different kind of warmth, the kind born not from fire, but from presence. He blinked at the ceiling, disoriented by the sterile white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the soft hum of generators. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Maya Brooks sat beside his bed, her hair unbound and falling over her shoulders, catching sunlight from the small window. Her cheeks were pale from exhaustion, yet her eyes, dark, steady, filled with something quiet and unbreakable, didn't waver. She had refused to leave his side. On the floor beside her chair, Shadow slept curled in a tight circle, the faint rise and fall of his small chest, proof that life had won. Ethan's lips twitched into a weak smile. "Seems like this time," he rasped, voice rough but alive. "I'm the one who got rescued." Maya looked up, and for the first time in days, her lips curved. "Don't sound so surprised," she said. "You've done enough saving for one lifetime." The door opened then, and Dr. Ben Carter stepped in, carrying a clipboard and a steaming cup of coffee. His military posture softened only slightly as he approached, the familiar scent of cold air and pine clinging to his clothes. The stubble on his chin had grown since the rescue, and dark circles framed his tired but alert eyes. "Good to see you conscious," Ben said, setting the coffee on the table. "You gave us a hell of a scare." Ethan managed a chuckle that turned into a wince. "You always did like the dramatic entrances," Ben smirked. "And you always did like picking fights with forces of nature." He checked the bandages around Ethan's thigh, adjusting them with professional ease. "You'll walk fine. Might ache when it rains, but it'll remind you you're still alive." From the hallway came the soft shuffle of boots. Clara Jennings appeared in the doorway, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her silver hair slightly tousled. The lines on her face seemed deeper now, carved by both worry and relief. She held a thermos and 2 apples, shaking her head as she looked at Ethan. "You men and your storms," she said. "Couldn't just stay put like sensible folk, could you?" Ethan's smile reached his eyes. "Good to see you too, Clara." She placed the thermos on the bedside table, then leaned down and squeezed his hand gently. "I told you," she whispered, "this mountain's not done with you yet." The next few weeks passed in slow rhythm, recovery, conversation, laughter returning to fill spaces once haunted by silence. When the snow melted and the first shoots of grass pushed through the thawing ground, Ethan walked again. Supported by a cane Ben had whittled himself. He moved stiffly but with purpose, the same quiet resolve that had once carried him through war, now guiding him toward something gentler. By early spring they had returned to the cabin site. What had once been shattered timbers and ash was now a clearing bathed in sunlight. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. A new structure rose where the old one had fallen, simple, sturdy, built by their own hands. Maya's laughter often echoed between the trees as she handed Ethan nails or fetched tools from Ben's truck. Shadow, now nearly grown, darted between them, tail wagging, ears alert, always nearby, as if unwilling to let the world take anyone else from him. One afternoon, Clara arrived carrying a folded map and a worn leather envelope. She wore her old wool coat despite the mild air, her sharp eyes glinting with mischief. "I've got something for you," she announced. She spread the map over the table, pointing to a patch of land beside the new cabin. "This here's mine, or was. I'm donating it." Ethan looked up, startled. "Clara, that's half your garden." She shrugged, lips twitching. "I'm old, son. I don't need that much space to grow tomatoes. You, on the other hand, need a place for those mutts of yours to learn their manners." Maya tilted her head. "You're serious?" "Deadly," Clara replied. "And besides," she added with a wink, "it's about time these woods heard laughter again." From that day forward, the plan began to take shape. With Ben's medical knowledge, Ethan's canine training expertise, and Maya's fierce compassion, they built something new. Haven Ridge Rescue, a rehabilitation and therapy center where veterans and rescue dogs could find each other and start over. Word spread quickly through nearby towns, and soon volunteers arrived. Carpenters, local farmers, and even a few retired soldiers carrying toolboxes instead of rifles. The spring weeks bloomed into a quiet miracle. The once desolate ridge now rang with the sounds of hammers, barking, and laughter. The scent of sawdust mingled with fresh pine. Maya planted flowers along the cabin path, her hands dirt-stained, but her eyes bright. Ethan worked from dawn to dusk, building kennels and training runs, his leg scar aching, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. Shadow became the first trainee, obedient yet playful, his loyalty absolute. The dog would follow Ethan's whistle through the forest, then return to nuzzle Maya's hand, tail thumping happily. Ben often stood by the fence, coffee in hand, watching them with quiet pride. "You know," he said one evening, "this place might actually save people." Ethan, hammer in hand, looked out at the setting sun. "That's the idea." By the time summer brushed the ridge in gold, the center stood ready. The cabin gleamed under the sun, windows wide open to the sound of the forest. A simple wooden sign waited at the entrance. Hand-carved letters etched deep into the grain. Haven Ridge Rescue, for those who still believe. On the morning of the opening, the sky was clear, and the air smelled of new life. Ethan stood on the porch, his cane forgotten at his side, watching Maya and Shadow playing in the meadow. She threw a stick, and the dog bounded after it, his bark echoing like joy itself. Her laughter drifted back to him, light and free. Ben was setting up coffee near the fence, Clara fussing over the flower pots. "Careful with those lilies," she scolded him. "They've survived worse than your clumsy hands." Ethan barely heard them. His gaze stayed fixed on Maya. The sun caught in her hair as she turned, waving to him, eyes bright as the morning sky. He walked toward her slowly, the ground soft beneath his boots. When he reached her, she handed him the stick Shadow had dropped and smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For knocking on that cabin door." Her expression softened. She stepped closer, placing her hand gently on his chest, over the steady rhythm beneath. "No," she whispered. "You're the one who opened it." He looked down at her, then at Shadow sitting between them, tail sweeping the ground. The wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Somewhere behind them, Clara's laughter mixed with Ben's low chuckle. The sun dipped lower, turning the snowmelt streams into ribbons of gold. Ethan looked toward the sign at the gate, its words glowing in the evening light. For those who still believe. The phrase settled deep in his chest, not as a motto, but as truth. As the wind rose gently, the trees whispered like old friends. Maya leaned into him. Shadow barked once, sharp, clear, joyful, and for the first time since the war, Ethan Cole felt not the weight of survival, but the quiet, steady pulse of belonging. The light stayed long that evening, refusing to fade, and in the middle of the mountain clearing, surrounded by laughter, bark, and birdsong, the man who once lived in silence finally understood. Some miracles don't arrive in thunder, they stay, in warmth, in love, and in the sound of life beginning again. In the end, the light that stayed isn't just about a soldier, a storm, or a rescue. It's about how love finds its way back to those who've stopped believing. Sometimes healing doesn't come through miracles, but through simple acts of courage, opening a door, reaching out a hand, choosing kindness even when it hurts. In everyday life, we all face our own storms, moments when the world feels cold and hope feels distant. But like Ethan, Maya, and Shadow, we can rebuild. We can choose to be the light that stays for someone else. Maybe your small act, a smile, a message, or a helping hand, is the rescue someone has been waiting for. If this story touched your heart, share it to spread its warmth. Leave a comment below. Tell us what your light is, or who helped you believe again. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, courage, and second chances. Because somewhere out there, someone still needs to hear that the light never truly fades. It just waits to be found again.